It's really fantastic to be able to be with you this morning and to share this space with two people I have a huge amount of admiration and respect for, Morag and Hordake. And yeah, really looking forward to having a little bit of a dive into this really important space of edible gardening, urban agriculture over the next hour. So for those who don't know me, my name is Nick Rose. I'm the Executive Director of a National Sustainable Food Systems Organisation, Sustain, the Australian Food Network. I'm also a lecturer in food studies and food systems at William Angliss Institute of TAFE in Melbourne. And before going further, I'd like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge any First Nations persons that may be with us this morning or listening to this presentation subsequently. All right, so what I'm going to share with you today is a particular piece of work that we did in June and July this year, the National Pandemic Gardening Survey, looking at the experience of Australians during these extraordinary months of the COVID-19 pandemic. But first, a little bit about Sustain. We're a National Sustainable Food Systems not-for-profit organisation, a registered health promotion charity. Our purpose is to reduce the burden of chronic dietary-related disease in Australia through collaborative multi-stakeholder interventions in the food system. So this little snapshot of our work since 2016 shows that we've set ourselves a broad program of work combining thought and practice leadership. A particular focus since the beginning has been on urban agriculture, which draws in part on my own background as a 2013 Churchill Fellow, investigating innovative models of urban agriculture in the post-industrial and even post-collapse US Midwest, Toronto, in Canada, and 5 provinces in Argentina, as regards its potential as a vehicle for food justice through both addressing food security needs and generating employment and livelihood opportunities. So we've had this focus on urban ag since our commencement in the early months of 2016. We've held 2 national urban agriculture forums, first in November 2016, second in February 2018. We've just launched ticketing for the 3rd, which will be on the 23rd and 24th of April in 2021 as part of a first ever National Urban Agriculture Month. So the survey, the Pandemic Gardening Survey, was motivated by media reports of the explosion of food growing at home, as Megan has just mentioned, in a personal capacity, as well as shutdowns of community gardens during the lockdown phases of the pandemic. We and our members and partners believe that communal food growing is an essential activity and should be recognised and supported as such, pandemic or not. So the survey ran from mid-June to mid-July and received 9,140 responses, including nearly 400 from Tasmania, nearly 900 from Queensland, 3,618 from Victoria. With the help of PhD student volunteers, we analysed the enormous data set, over 25,000 individual comments, and delivered the findings to national audiences in webinars on the 16th of September and the 9th of October. And we are just now finalising our survey report, which will be released in the coming week. Just to look at the context, why does any of this matter? I'm sure a lot of you know, attending this session, that the food system, simply put, is, as I would say, the biggest global driver of climate change, species loss, hunger and ill health. We can look at some of the reasons for that more in questions, but that is the big picture. The food system, it's evolved over the 20th century, has become an incredibly destructive force in terms of both ecological and human health. So these are some of the really big drivers for change, both in Australia and globally: human health, ecological breakdown, and inequality. And the COVID pandemic has really revealed all of these very starkly, reinforced them. From a policy perspective, and we are very much interested in an agenda for policy changes I'll talk about towards the end. The food system really spans so many areas of political and economic and social life, be it environment and sustainability, health and well-being, land use, planning and community strengthening, so many areas of social life. And this is what our call to action is. we're calling for the establishment of a major national fund on the basis that the documented benefits of people growing their own food are very substantial, and they've been further validated by our survey findings. And we're seeing this as an urgent and necessary investment in public health in Australia. So you might say, well, $500 million, that's a lot of money to spend on people growing their own food, but just putting it in perspective, we are currently spending as a country about $70 billion a year dealing with the impacts of chronic disease, much of which relates to diet and lack of physical activity. And then you add on top of that mental illness, which the Productivity Commission last year estimated to be costing us $180 billion every year. That's $500 million every single day, with 8 million working days lost. So adding those two together, we're looking at $240 billion just in those two aspects of ill health in Australia. That exceeds our total annual healthcare spending by a third. And yet, in terms of spending on preventive healthcare, we're only investing $2 billion, less than half the amount spent by the UK, the US, Canada, and New Zealand. And this is a chronic underinvestment in investing in Australians' health, and it's been going on for years. So this is why we're saying this is really a minor corrective measure when seen in the light of that bigger picture. So who completed the survey? There you see the geographic spread of respondents right around the country, covering 62% of all postcodes, 29% of the country's total landmass. Concentration in the urban centres, the capital cities, as you would expect, but still a good representation from regional, rural, and even remote communities. Looking at some demographics, the majority of respondents were over the age of 55. The ethnic and cultural background of respondents broadly reflected the wider Australian community, as revealed by the National Census. From a gender perspective, respondents were overwhelmingly female, 77% identified as female. More than 70% of respondents reported a lower household income than the national average of $117,000 per annum, and approximately a quarter of respondents reported a household income below $50,000 per annum, which is the poverty line in Australia for a family of four. On the whole, respondents were fairly experienced gardeners, with over half having more than 10 years gardening experience. However, a significant minority, 761 in total, were new gardeners, and of that number, 341 commenced gardening since the COVID-19 pandemic. So looking at some of the findings then in terms of health and well-being, and we can look at this from the perspective of food security, physical activity, mental health, and connection. So as I mentioned, a quarter of respondents to this survey were from very low income households. And what's really significant here is that they were also the most productive gardeners. So the message there is that growing your own food really can make a really important difference for food security. Of the gardeners who grew more than 30% of their own food, the most productive gardeners, nearly half of them were from that very low income bracket. So why do edible gardens also matter for food security more broadly? Well, I think the one that I would like to emphasise here is the question of dignity. The traditional approach in Australia to deal with food insecurity has been through distribution of emergency food through food banks. There are many problems with that. One is the quality of the food that people are obtaining. And also from a social perspective, there is a lot of stigma and shame with having to queue up and receive charitable handouts. Far more dignified, we would say, to actually be empowered and enabled and supported to grow more of your own food. Also, a major problem in Australia, as I alluded to, is people not eating healthily. We're constantly told in multiple surveys from public health agencies that none of us are eating enough fruit and vegetables. Well, if you garden, you'll know that you grow a lot of veg and fruit, and that you eat a diverse diet and a healthy diet. So a significant number of respondents actually grew 7 different categories of fruit or vegetables. So these included fruiting vegetables such as tomatoes, eggplants, leafy greens, herbs, tree fruits, and or root crops. So these are, some of the quotes in the, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with the quotes, we're just showing them showing them for you from the Gold Coast. As a gardener, talks about being in love with her garden, her culinary repertoire, the expansion of from the garden to the kitchen, and experimenting with different foods. So a lot of gardeners talked about that enjoyment, that pleasure that arrives not just from growing food, but also from cooking and eating it and experimenting it from that perspective. Physical health is also really important. As I mentioned, the burden of chronic disease has a lot to do with Australians not being physically active. Gardening is a great form of gentle physical activity, particularly for older gardeners. So here, one of the comments, a GP from the Central Coast, New South Wales, said that gardening has been the perfect physical activity to help her manage her health conditions, providing weight-bearing activities while also enjoying fresh air and sunshine. And she says that as a healthcare provider, I fully endorse edible gardening as an intervention that would improve public and climate health. And I'd view any government support, federal, state or local, as a very good and wise use of my taxes. The link between mental health and gardening was a major focus of the survey, and here the findings were overwhelming. Over 70% of respondents said it either greatly or significantly improved their mental health and well-being. So there were literally hundreds of comments like these throughout the survey about the difference gardening made in their lives. Not only did it allow people to manage and reduce negative emotions like stress and anxiety, but it also enabled happiness, joy, a sense of purpose and control over one's life. So here's some other examples. That one from the ACT, the lady says, I have cancer, my garden keeps me alive, especially on the bad days. My greatest joy is seeing my grandchildren fossick through it, eating as they go. For me, keeping the garden going in times of stress is a way of asserting some control of my life, of establishing and maintaining some normality while the world spins out of control. So in addition to those therapeutic events, also gardening helped people cope with bereavement, with emotional stress, with grieving, those kinds of issues. Lots of people, sharing these very personal stories. And that was a real feature of this survey, the really intimate personal stories that people shared with us in these tens of thousands of comments. And so in terms of social connection, and that's been a big focus of the post-COVID recovery with the enforced lockdowns and social distancing and isolation and so on. As anybody who garden knows, particularly in communal spaces, public spaces, it brings people together, it fosters a spirit of sharing and community resilience. And I think that really speaks to the broader agenda of the whole new economy paradigm that this conference is about. And these are also qualities that will be important in dealing with the challenges of the climate emergency and other shocks that we're likely to face in the coming years. So that's in terms of human health and well-being. Gardening also has a really important role to play in terms of ecology and ecological health and well-being. Research on edible gardens has demonstrated their significant potential to contribute to healthy and biodiverse urban environments. And there were hundreds of comments again about gardeners speaking about this aspect of it, and this is a motivator. They reflected on everything from creating habitats and offering food for flora and fauna to maintaining seed diversity and fostering the microbial diversity of the soil. Now, I want to say that when we're talking about the action agenda that we're coming to and talking about expanding land access, that this has to be on the basis of acknowledging Australia's history of colonisation and dispossession. And so in making the call to action that I'm about to do in a moment, we share with Dr. Libby Porter, who's a professor in urban planning, the view that mainstream urban planning processes should acknowledge continuing coexisting Indigenous methods of land governance and work towards honouring Indigenous histories, knowledge and relationships in urban environments. So just in the last 90 seconds or so of this presentation, I'll share with you our action agenda. Just on looking at how we frame this, we asked gardeners what kind of support they wanted in terms of continuing their food growing activities. And this is what they said. Overwhelmingly, they were calling for more support in knowledge and training and mentoring, particularly new gardeners. Low-income gardeners wanted financial support as well as access to inputs and material. That was followed by access to land, tools and equipment, and then physical assistance and extra hands, particularly for those with disabilities. So some of the barriers that people mentioned, people in renting situations, local councils not being supportive in terms of enabling the establishment of community gardens, accessing verges and nature strips, and so on. So all of that, as well as our other research and our knowledge of the sector, has led us to articulate this action agenda for urban agriculture, a roadmap for transformation, as we say, across these 6 core elements. So really just looking very quickly, and I'm conscious that I'm hard on my 15 minutes, so I can come back to this in questions if people are interested in more detail. The 6 elements, one is urban planning and land use. We want to see edible gardening and urban agriculture embedded as key priorities in state and local planning schemes, supported by targets for urban food production. In terms of capacity building, skills development, mentoring, training and knowledge transfer for and between institutions, communities and individuals, covering practical, social and organisational dimensions of urban food production. In relation to, this is where the, come on, there you go. So the $500 million fund, this is how we have roughly kind of scoped it. Social prescribing and rates discounts to incentivise unlocking vacant land for edible food production, a massive investment in community gardens, in coordination wages, and also increasing capacity in local government with food systems officers, a major grants program for schools, community groups and low-income housing, $45 million in a national infrastructure fund and $5 million in peak body network and sector coordination. And I'll finish there by saying we also see a need to have this embedded through policies and plans. We think every local and state government should have a food system and food security plan that has urban food production at its heart, and that this sector needs to have collaborative governance and coordination to really ramp up a mass expansion of edible gardening, to embrace our vision of making Australian towns and cities edible. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was fabulous. Coming from a policy background myself, I mean, thank you for doing that work and creating such an evidence-led policy framework that hopefully and maybe could be adopted into national policy. That's amazing. All right, so we're going to move to our next speaker now, and that's Maura Gamble, and she'll be talking on permaculture, myceliating cultures of regeneration in the new economy. I could say that all day long. All right.
So thank you so much, Megan, for that, for the welcome, and welcome to everyone who's here as on your wonderful Sunday to be part of this NENA conference here. And I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm meeting with you, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to thank Nick for, like as Megan said, for that amazing work that you've been doing in this space for a really long time, but particularly just recently for bringing together that incredible study that can then give voice to all the things that we, that we've been talking about. We knew this, but having it in the form that you've made it now makes it so much more powerful, and for us able to, like, I don't know how many times I've already referred to your study to give extra evidence and background to the work that I've been doing, not just here in Australia, but around the world as well. So thank you, Nick, and to all your team for making that happen. And I'm busy working to help mentor people too, to be those people who can be teachers within those local networks. And that's kind of part of this talk, is about how permaculture is myceliating. And really what I mean by that is that throughout COVID and even before, permaculture has been rippling out across the globe. I mean, permaculture started in Australia, gosh, about 40 years ago, and now it's in at least 170 odd countries. It's in villages everywhere. Just the other night, I was on a call, zooming in. It was 11 o'clock here, and I was zooming into a garden in the middle of a Kenyan village. and they had a little laptop set up in the middle of this food forest, a permaculture garden. I was hearing a Maasai woman tell me how permaculture is going to be the thing that actually helps them to survive. And, you know, so it's everywhere, but it's not this big system, a hierarchy that's gone out. It's people to people, idea to idea, connections. It's this relational process that's happening, and it spreads because it makes sense. It spreads because it helps. It is contextualized in a local context. It enables people to respond to what they see in front of them and to be able to design solutions that relate to where they are. So essentially, permaculture is about one planet living. You know, what does that mean in, you know, in all of its sense? So, I mean, if you look at the ecological footprint studies that have been done, it shows that if everyone lived like a typical Australian, we'd need 4 Earths. We only have one. What does that life look like? What does it mean to live a one planet life? And the best thing I can find is the permaculture model of which has these ethics that underpin it: earth care, people care, and fair share. Very locally based, local food systems, local economic systems, low energy, and it not just about sustainability either. It's about regeneration. So how can we regenerate the soils? How can we regenerate the forests? How can we regenerate our local communities? And these are the kind of strategies that are rippling out and making sense to Maasai women in the middle of Kenyan villages, because it is, they look around them and they say, well, I don't really see many options. My land is degraded. There's either floods or there's droughts. I don't have work. And one of the things that's really motivated me this year too is hearing about how the World Food Programme talking about 265 million people are on the brink of starvation by the end of this year. And you know what Nick was talking about with dignity and the access to food, a lot of the refugees that we work with in many parts of the world with permaculture are saying, well, you know, there's food rations, but did you know that since COVID, those food rations from the United Nations have been cut by more than half? So we just get a small amount of beans and rice, and that most of what reaches us has already been funneled off in different directions. What we get is moldy beans and rice that we have to wash and dry. And so from a dignity perspective, actually surrounding themselves in food gardens that gives them access on a daily basis to this is deeply about fair share and people care and addressing human need where the need is so great. And so essentially it's about resilience, building resilience and regeneration and creating healthy human habitats. And in actually creating healthy human habitats, restoring the land and ecosystems. As Nick said, you know, our current food system has been eroding the basis on which life can exist. And so our task is to regenerate that and regenerate it from a food perspective. And coming back to home gardens, like my greatest love is being able to just go out straight into the garden, straight around me, and be able to look and see what's available today, and to take the kids out and say, okay, harvest me what you find, and we can eat from that. And it is actually remarkable how little money you need when you start to eat in this way. And so when you have situations where people have lost their jobs, where they're home-based, where there's, you know, we're in an economic crisis as well as a health crisis, as well as an ecological crisis, actually regenerating or building home gardens in this way is kind of a radical approach to building real and lasting security for people. And also this everyday access to food that, and Nick talked about this too, about how that it's different type of food because it's packed with nutrient density and vitality. And, you know, kale is not kale. You know, if you get a kale that's come from a chemically farmed environment, transported, stored, refrigerated, as opposed to a leaf that you get straight from your garden. It's a completely different type of food, and it nourishes our bodies and nourishes our minds completely differently as well. There's an intense sense of well-being that comes from having a direct connection to food and a relocalization of our food system. And so a key part of this is relocalizing and heading out into our commons. And I know this has been challenging of late, being able to access the commons, but community gardens, city farms, street tree planting, verge gardening, rooftop gardening, like, start to put on those kind of vegetable or garden lenses and walk around the neighborhood and see where that can happen. Take the food into the streets. Take your dining table out into the street and start sharing a feast. Share food across the fence. Find places in the corners of wherever you can to start actually growing food, because it's not actually just the growing of food that happens then, it's the growing of community. And that's where a huge amount of the well-being takes place. And also thinking about how in doing that, you're also gardening for nature. Part of where I live in an eco-village up in Queensland, in southeast Queensland. And part of what I design in my garden is that actually it's as much for the birds and the bees and the butterflies and the kangaroos and the wallabies and the platypus and the turtles and all of the other species that exist, as much as it is for me. Because when we enter into degraded landscapes, a really important part of regenerating the ecological system is thinking about not just what it is for me, how much food can I get, what's my yield. It is about regenerating an ecosystem and a habitat, and a healthy human habitat is one that is integrated and has space for all life to flourish, because that's when we're able to flourish too. And I spend a lot of time too doing walkabouts around the landscape with local elders, and this is Wurunga. And he spends a lot of time out with me in the garden talking about all the different types of plants and medicinal uses and different edible weeds even, or different ways to use all the trees that are there. And he talks about how your garden is your supermarket. And so he's been taking permaculture out into, he goes on adventures out into he goes walkabout into the centre of Australia, and he packs up his bus with tools and with seeds and materials, and helps local communities to get more gardens happening there too. And so really exploring ways to integrate bush tucker and localized food systems that help to build the health of communities there, and really look at what we're calling a cultivated ecology. So it's not like rows and rows of gardens over here and then nature over here and then people over here. How can we bring those things all back together again in a regenerative way? And this is what Wurunga thinks is the brilliant part of permaculture and how it relates to Indigenous cultures. And also I work with a number of different communities around the world, and this is happy farms at Plum Village, a place that was started by Thich Nhat Hanh. And he has these happy farms, and they're all now starting to integrate permaculture ways of thinking in there too, to really look at how to take their spiritual practice and make that come through their farming and their gardening, and really looking at how to think about transforming any waste in the system back into something that then nourishes them. And so the beauty of being able to weave permaculture through working with Indigenous communities, through spiritual communities, through eco-village communities, through urban environments, and into communities like here in Kenya, where a few years ago I took my daughter, who's in the front there, and my son, they were 10 and 12 at the time, and we went there to work with women's farms, with orphanages, with permaculture programs in various parts. And it was an incredibly inspiring thing particularly for my children, I think, to experience actually what is hunger, what is regeneration, what is the impact of colonization on various parts of the world, and to see it firsthand. They'd heard me banging on about it all the time, but to actually witness it and see it firsthand, what that all really meant. was transformative. And so Maya and a few friends of hers started up something called Permayouth. Now, Permayouth is a global network of young people around the world who connect every week to explore ways that permaculture can help young people address the things that are going on in the world. There's massive amounts of eco-anxiety in young people. And this started after all the Greta campaigns, and a lot of kids were coming home and saying, but what do I do now? You know, being out there on the streets and calling for change and not seeing change happening, but wanting to find ways to actually be positive, practical activists that they're calling practivists. So this is one of the little local hubs, but they talk every week with groups in refugee camps. So this is a group in Ramwanja refugee camp in Uganda. And so they have pen pals, they learn together, they make films together, they share songs, they talk about different plants. It's this incredible exchange of knowledge and ideas. And Bemariki, who's there, is actually their teacher and mentor. And we have a mentors network around the world. And these mentors are then sharing with other people. And so it continues to ripple out. So this is Sakina, who's in another refugee camp, Kakuma, which has 200,000 people living in this refugee camp in the desert. And so she talks about how permaculture is the knowledge we need for a future, for hope. And she talks about how so many young people are just devastated by depression of being stuck in these camps for well over a decade. Now, she's been in this camp for over a decade herself. And a lot of kids are growing up there. There's no opportunities there. So permaculture is offering this opportunity. And part of what this is too is uncoupling from the food system that exists. And it relates often to actually having the means to be able to grow food, which have been taken away. The means to be able to access land, to access the knowledge and the information to be able to do it this way, to be able to have the local seeds that can be saved and shared. And so Vandana Shiva talks about the beauty of the seed is that out of one, you can get millions. And that's an economics of abundance. So rather than getting one hybrid seed, planting it, and then it's gone, you plant one lettuce seed, you'll get 10,000 seeds when you save that. It's this incredible abundance. So when you take that away from people, it's actually taking away sovereignty. It's taking away the rights to have control of one's own food system. So we've lost so much of the diversity over the years. So a big part of the work that we're doing in permaculture is helping to create seed networks. And it's part of a gift economy. So we just exchange and share and transfer them around. And you can have plant materials or seed materials that enable people to do this. And so Van Damme also talks about in nature's economy, the currency is not money, it's life. And if we think about a seed, it's a living thing. It's alive. It's just waiting for that potential moment. The seed is an incredible source of abundance. And so when we work in the refugee camps, we're working with young people like these kids. So these girls flanking their little brother here are fierce new permaculture educators who are going out into their community, calling themselves permaculture ambassadors, helping to transform local communities. They take seeds, they take plants, and they go and help get gardens happening in their neighborhood. And so the teachers that we're working with are now teaching young people, and then they're realizing they don't have enough because the young people are so keen in seeing this. So now we're starting to teach teachers. I'm not. Sakina on the left is, and she's going out and teaching a whole group of young people who can then go out and teach more young people. And the guy in the middle with the big beaming smile at the bottom there, this is Somali. And Somali joins in on our Permayouth meetings every time. And he's actually a musician, and he's writing songs to talk about permaculture. And so this is looking at ways of, rather than just sharing information or facts or ideas, he's taking it and embedding it into the heart of the culture and finding the ways to express it in a way that will be taken up and make sense. And just, it's like, and the songs he's writing are like earworms. They just go round and round in your head. I've been sharing them around the world. We actually were able to submit it to a film and music competition, and he won this global competition. So we're now working to help him create a music studio so that he can be with his friends actually making permaculture songs in Swahili, which can then be able to be just take permaculture ideas and run them even further, because it's radical over there too, because over there it's actually illegal to sell and trade seeds. So they're not going to sell them, they're just going to distribute them. The only education that's given around farming is around chemicals and growing monocultures. And so this is radical. It's about enabling people to take control back in their lives when they have absolutely when they're stuck in refugee camps. And so part of too what the Perma Youth are doing in helping to ripple out all this is connecting all these dots and then doing cross-cultural and cross-generational events once a month. And they, so far they've had 30 different countries joining them on these festivals. So they're just short, like a 90-minute session. They find someone who's kind of like an expert in the field. They interview them. They get music and poetry and art and film, garden tours, and then they beam this out across the world and get to have conversations. You know, just imagine being 12 and being able to have conversations with kids in all different parts of the world about these things that matter. My daughter, this is Maya here in the middle of the festival, host here. She now homeschools. She was at school and she said, Mum, you know, nothing at school is being talked about that even matters. No one's even talking about climate change. No one's even talking about regenerative farming. We go in to talk about, you know, agriculture, but it's about the old system. My geography teacher doesn't even believe that climate change exists. And so when she asked to be homeschooled, it was like, yes, okay, that's absolutely fine. We need to be exploring and learning about things that really matter right now. And that's what a lot of young people are feeling. So this network is about connecting up people who kind of get that and really want to make a difference in the world, but felt powerless to do that. Whereas now they have a voice and they're connecting. So people like David Holmgren have joined them. Costa Georgiou just spent an hour with them. They're connecting with people, elders in various parts of the world. So this is the one that's coming up in a couple of weeks. So if you know of young people, please let them know about it. permayouth.org, you can sign up for free and it's online. It's just 90 minutes. And then if you feel like donating for your young people to be part of this, all of the money goes directly to the refugee programs. And so these are some of the people that are recipients. Sorry, I just noticed that my timer
I was just about to.
Yeah. So I saw 10 minutes, but it was saying 10:41. Sorry. I'll wrap up now. And just say that all the money that we donate goes directly to the refugees and to women's groups and to buy women's farms. We also have a whole lot of masterclasses that are available for you to access free. I'll just go to the links. We talk with people like David Holmgren. We have podcasts that goes out connecting all of this. So all of this stuff is available for free and you can get that through our permaculturelife.com. And our key goal is really about teaching permaculture teachers. So these are some of the links there. permayouth.org. The registered charity that we run to support all these programs is Ethos Foundation, org.org.au. And yeah, sorry, Jorge, that's my mistake. Thank you for listening, and I'll hand it over to you, Jorge.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Jorge from Gold Coast on Scotland. I'm going to talk with a little experience we have here on Iran. It's a small suburb close to maybe 25 minutes away from the beach. And it's another 25 minutes to rainforest, to Springbrook, Lamington Park. We have an edible cake garden or edible garden on parkland. And this year, with the pandemic year or that difficult, we have able to harvest and donate 30 times. And that is about 1,000 kilos of fresh food we don't keep a detailed record of what we do. Just we know approximate volume, 3,500 liters maybe, But the more important part of that, is a public edible landscape. Is born a concept of a food forest garden, 3 years ago, have been developed as the edible landscape garden, and now we use a bio-intensive grow method to grow that quantity of food. It's producing urban food and small size. It's a zero budget project. We don't use machine. We don't know, no use a prefabricated component to do, for example, a rising garden bed. And it's an agroecologic bio-intensive growth method, as we said before. It's a public edible landscape, and it's happening in a public parkland, so it's an unfenced project. This year we started a new volunteer training program we call Edible Garden Promoter. It's free for participants, and it's unfinanced. We cannot grant any kind of money to run the community education program. It's a program with learning by doing on edible gardening activity, grow and harvesting food by the people who participate and who donate to the local neighborhood center food bank. And people with a problem of food insecurity, so people who cannot afford to buy all that food from the shopping center, from the shopping, they are able to get a discount price of food. That is a socio-solidarity relationship, and we are able to provide maybe the only fresh and healthy food that people get in that food bank box. So that is an exchange of time and knowledge by the people who are under employment, and they do that communal social food that benefit the neighbor on the food crisis. And for the participant, that means a return of dignity, life purpose, social cohesion, and sense of belong to underemployment participant. It's a fair and solidarity relationship. The social solidarity is part of the bigger local circular loop. That means we are able to collect food scraps from the community to transform the organic matter into a biofertilizer and soil enhanced product to sustain edible garden. In a way, we are able to generate more soil all the time, soil to grow more food. Now, that project is a reverse engineer on social solidarity and urban agroecology and edible garden promoter. That is a knowledge or is an observation or experience from the global south, organic foods cultivation practice. In other words, what we do or what I do is to see how a food is grow organic on country or Latin America, because I am Spanish background speaking, and my country Chile in Latin America. So my observation is how organic food is produced by a small farmer, campesino, people who direct with their own hand and working the distribute local food. So it's a direct relationship of produced food and the community they serve. It's a solidarity economic or a solidarity enterprise, which use the C factor as the principal component to able to grow as a solidarity enterprise. No, that means it's the community, it's the communion in between people who participate, it's the cooperation, it's the collaboration of people who have that experience to put a concept together to create a group shared solution. No? The agroecologist in that sense, no, is a science and practice and social movement, and if it's a connection, it's a relationship between a tradition grower, indigenous people, family farmer, and people coming from university to share and to understand new technology and new application of that practice. But it's driving by the social move, from the campesino to campesino, or a small farmer to small farmer. That's use of practicing that allow redesign, diversify, productive and resilient agroecosystem. Transform the food system. It's a ethics, it's a social relation of mutuality and respect, commitment to more equality, change, and land steward. Edible garden or a project is a grow fruiting tree, and the moment are small, so it's supering, and grow biointensive garden around that tree. We have living green roots, crucify a diversity of food around the tree who are growing. Maybe they are productive in 5 years or so. No? But yeah, the vegetable garden use a zero and low cost material, as you can see on the picture on the left. Cultivate on large scale. So the garden is not in a flat soil, is on a small hill of 12-degree slope. And to create the garden bed, we made a couple micro catchment to harvest water and to retain water to a slow release, after a good raining. The canopy tree shade prevent evapotranspiration, so the plant need minimal water. So we reduce the necessity to use town water. About the wetting, we have used compost, but as well at the moment we use a ferment food wetting system. Is where we can apply the crop scrap from the garden, the collection of fruit juice bar and the local farmer market, and kitchen food wet bring by the neighbor. We transform that food wet to a solid liquid fertilizer, and then go to feed the soil microbe. That enable intensive sequential weekly crop harvesting year round. The social connection happening in the garden elevates from the edible scale to agroecology demonstrative site. As a zero-budget garden can be viewed by low-income families. So as a demonstration garden, people who experience the garden by visiting can be motivated to replicate that kind of gardening, without extra cost for the family. This encourage grow food agroecological, the experiential process witness the social benefit of advancing urban agriculture. The crop yields. We say when we start, no, we have harvested 30 times this year, about 1,000 kilos of food, and that can be translated into 33 kilos per harvest. That is 9 kilos for a square meter. No, that is a cultivated garden around, our garden is about 300 square meters at the moment, where we have 33 kilos per week or for harvest. And that is about 9 kilos per square meter at the moment. No, the potential of the garden, we have a license to use 1,000 square meter. So we have a potential to produce 5,000 kilos of organic food, maybe at the end of next year, because we may by hand one garden bed on the time. As we said before, we don't incorporate any machine and we don't bring anything external. We don't buy manure, we don't buy anything from outside of the site. We produce everything on the site. So all the soil need, we create the condition to make that soil on the garden.
Jorge, just to leave you all 5 minutes or a little bit more to have a question or two, are you happy to sort of wrap up in sort of next 30 seconds?
It's a true slide.
Okay,
so,
great.
So the garden has the potential to feed 55 persons. Healthy nutrient food for 20,000 people, vulnerable people in the city. We only need 350 of that kind of edible garden. The city has 2,000 parks, so to asking for 350 edible garden is not much to asking. No, the potential of 350 edible garden create occupation for 700 people, underemployment people at the moment, to become a public social urban food grower. So the urban food insecurity is a societal crisis, should treat with the severity of the pandemic crisis. It's a public social food growth should receive income benefits no less of the level of the initial Just Keeper program at the minimum. That's my end.
What a powerful message to finish on, Jorge. I love those stats about what's really possible with what you've done. Thank you so much to the three speakers. What a great sort of breadth of presentation from, really looking at that broad policy, what's happening internationally, what's happening with youth, what's happening on the ground. Amazing. Apologies for being a bit of a poor facilitator today and not really keeping on top of the time. I just blame being at the third day. I'm happy to go a little bit over time if anyone wants to hang around. If you need to leave, by all means, just put something in the chat and head off. So straight over to questions. If you have a question, can I please ask you to put a Y in the chat box? And because we are a lovely small group, then I will ask you to unmute and ask your question. So any question, even if it's one of the speakers, if you have a question for someone else, then pop a Y in the chat and we can ask those.
I'll ask a question of Jorge, if that's okay.
Nick. Yeah.
So Jorge, that's pretty impressive what you've achieved there. So you said this is all completely voluntary. With your plan to expand it to make it a bigger effort, are you proposing the same model that this is all done by volunteers and nobody gets paid, or what are your thoughts on that?
To be true, even myself, no, I volunteer, but being a person over 55, I receive some income from Centrelink to maintain myself. So at the end, it's not a volunteer. No, we have an income. With the COVID thing, it's a double income. Maybe that income, even if it's minimum, is enough for people who have no much credits to pay. No, it's a minimum sustainable income. My proposal is to recognize that volunteer as a true work. In other words, what I do and what other volunteers do is a public food growing. We are paid, we are financed by the state, by the people, by our citizens.
Okay. Okay, all right, so you are proposing that the urban farmers receive some kind of wage or something from the state as effectively providing a public service. Is that what you're
Yeah, and the
suggesting?
same level, the city council pay a cleaner to cut grass on the street.
Yeah, okay,
No.
all right, great. Okay, well, yeah, that's what we're arguing for.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Any other questions? Yeah, go for it, John. You can unmute.
Yeah, can I make, I guess, a couple of questions, maybe a comment too, is there is a sharehood type thing where people can share their land and farmers can farm that land. I forget what the website is, but that's happening around the place. And I think...
Land share.
Is it? Yeah. And then Marag, interesting how you've made the connections overseas for refugees. How do you see that panning out now with no flights available? You know, it's difficult now to, connect with, because we've done some refugee community garden on some blitzes for their houses, and they're renting, and then next thing you know, they've been turfed out because we've improved the house and the landlord sold it.
Well, I think the thing was that maybe a slightly different context than what I'm working in. With the refugees there, they're in a settlement and they've been allocated a little piece of land each, and they get to build a little hut on that and make a garden. So they actually have a level of land security, I guess, in those settlements. To a certain extent, they could get tossed out and sent back to their country or moved on somewhere else, but they're not going to get actually tossed out because they've improved the value of that land there. And this is where community farms and community gardens come into play, because there is the security. So what you do in and around your home may change that, and that economic system doesn't support that. But having community farms, then you have access to that continuously. And I think that's something really important to look at. In terms of traveling, like, we don't travel overseas. The thing is that there are so many people over there already who know how to do this. Some of the projects, that there was one new refugee camp that just recently was identified, and what we did was we just connecting the dots. So there's permaculture teachers here, they can just travel across to here, and then those teachers travel, and it's just, that's that kind of myceliating process. We don't need to be over there. There's nothing necessarily extra that we can offer in, except for actually resourcing them to do what they can do already. And that way too, it's really quite, up until recently, there weren't that many permaculture courses that were being running there that weren't actually run by Westerners, which was also disabling. And so now, there's this huge movement that's happening because they're all just taking off on their own. I did want to jump in too quickly, because I know we're at the end, but Nick, you were asking about paying for people to farm. I would actually also like to advocate for paying people to lead programs. And I'm sure that's part of what you're talking about. But say, for example, all throughout Brisbane City Council, the council's been paying me for well over a decade to run free workshops for people. So community gets it for free, but the people who teach permaculture and teach different sort of skills get an income from doing that work. And I think that's a really useful spend in terms of
yeah,
budget
absolutely.
growth?
I mean, I think I think the people growing the food, I think people teaching people how to grow food, people running community kitchens, all these things are of immense public benefit and should be recognised as such, in the same way that we have people taking care of parks and gardens, maintenance people. We have people doing health promotion work, encouraging people to make, as they call it, healthy choices in food. All these kinds of things are publicly funded by taxpayer dollars. The fund that we've scoped absolutely would fund people to do what you're doing, which is training and mentoring and guidance, as well as people coordinating projects like Hordeke's, as well as other roles. We've scoped roles for people doing work of communications and narrative and storytelling and building the like the little snapshot of what we've done today, of like sharing and telling stories from around Australia and around the world. Paying people to do that, paying researchers to build the evidence base. What Hordeke's done in documenting some metrics about quantities that are being produced, and other things about returning biodiversity, microbial levels in soil, carbon sequestration, all these kinds of things. We think that part of this fund should be used to support researchers and citizen science, not simply experts in academic institutions, but people on the ground doing the work to collectively build this knowledge and evidence base about exactly what kind of transformative change all these things create. That's very much part of the funding that we're suggesting, and it's really on the premise that, as I said at the start, we spend so much money as a country dealing with the impacts of just human health of the food system. I haven't even talked about the ecological damage and the massive land clearing that went on in Queensland for years under Campbell Newman's government, for example, and the costs of climate change. Like, you add all that in, hundreds of billions of dollars it's costing us to deal with these issues. We think it's just common sense to invest in actually nurturing ourselves and nurturing the country, and that's the rationale on which we're making this case.
Thank you so much, Nick. If each of you maybe even have 2 more minutes, Alison had a question. We might ask Alison's question, and then I can wrap up after that, so we don't take too much of your Sunday. Alison, did you still want to ask your question?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you.
The other day, hi Nick, I've run into you before at different things, and I'm a dietitian in my job. And the other day, I was talking to a group of Indigenous health workers about food security, and the whole how do people get more fruit and vegetables, and it is exactly as Nick said, and as people are demonstrating, people really. So I guess what we really had the conversation about what the global situation was like, that we probably need to produce more things locally, producing foods locally, and the resources that already exist in Cairns to do that. But prior to that, I was talking to someone who I don't think he's linked into NENA yet, though I keep sending them emails, is Agriculture. I don't know if anyone's heard of Agriculture, run by Guju and his partner Jenny. They've done a huge amount in the last 10 years. I met them first in Kuranda at the Permaculture Convergence, and they're just doing a heap of stuff. But what he wants to do is to get the social housing, actually, that he said they're supposed to landscape build these housing, but they haven't, and he wants to foodscape it. So I don't know I guess my question is, what kind of resources and what kind of backup and knowledge about how to deal with state governments and, how to lever that, I suppose, because that sounds like a really good idea. A lot of people get behind, but someone's got to organise it. And where do they get the extra information from about how to actually get that moving, and including all the resources that are available currently? Like the Cairns Council actually has plots that people can do community gardens on, so they're okay. But this housing is controlled by the state government. So
thank you, Alison.
yeah,
thank you so much. So I'll put that over to all three speakers if you have some advice, thoughts, suggestions, inspiration.
Well, I think if it is, you know, state government responsibility, the thing to do would be to, you know, to take it up with the relevant department and the relevant minister and the local member of parliament up there, and to, you know, to make the proposal. I mean, my experience is, you know, if you don't make proposals and you don't make demands, then nothing ever changes. And you know, you need to do that. You need to make the case. Yeah, I'm. If you want to send me an email, I'm happy to, you know, continue the conversation with you offline, Alison. And yeah, look at what, you know, because we're publishing this report, as I said, on Wednesday this week. We're aiming to get it out.
okay.
So as Morag said, and as people in local government have already said to us, that you know, having this you know, having this data now of you know, a huge number of Australians speaking in quite a bit of detail about these activities and what difference it makes to them, from, you know, dietary health and nutritional health to mental health and well-being to you know, physical activity to social connection, is really quite powerful. And we are wanting to put that in front of, you know, as many people as we possibly can, and certainly to people who hold purse strings in state government, who own control of social and community housing. That's exactly one of our recommendations as part of our action plan, that there should be investment in, you know, permaculture, food forests, and you know, similar initiatives in social housing for all the reasons that we've talked about today and all the reasons that we know. So yeah, happy, Alison, if you want to send me an email, I'll put my email in the chat so you've got it.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay.
Morag or Jorge, did you have any thoughts on that question?
I think I was going to say something similar. Absolutely. Yeah.
Fabulous.
I guess
Jorge?
when making examples are great when making submissions. So if other people have reports and they've got actual data, you know, it's really good to be able to actually say, this is information, this is solid information, that you can see what the results are. You can see, I mean, your kind of scoping, Nick, is great. It's fantastic too, because it's actually making it less, it's making it, I guess, easier for government to understand. Rather, they don't really understand small groups of local permaculturalists.
No, they
don't.
don't.
Have done things on a large scale.
What's been said to me with planners, both at local government level and state government level, is they have this kind of mindset where, you know, food production and agriculture is something that doesn't happen in cities. It happens kind of out there, you know, in the hinterland or in, you know, agricultural areas outside cities, and what's within cities is for housing or, you know, public parks or, you know, commercial activities. But that's the mind shift that has to take place in the minds of the planners, and that's why we talk about getting this, getting changes in planning frameworks and getting commitments, you know, from senior levels to prioritising the sorts of initiatives that, you know, Morag and Jorge and all of us are trying to, you know, and are championing.
Nick.
So that's the shift that needs to take place.
Thank you so much. Jorge, did you want to make a comment? And then I think after that, I might wrap things up. Thank you.
I want to say something about Alisa. No, I think that another way to influence change, you know, when talking about a style of housing, social house, you know, is to actually to motivate and facilitate a process from the neighbor, from the people who actually use a social house, and for them to integrate by doing, you know, to occupy a part of the site, to actually to start planting and negotiate from there. No, is you can start to action and trigger discussion after. You know, you say sorry, but it's a way how you actually connect with the decision maker.
Thank you, Jorge. Kerry, I apologize we didn't get to your question. Nick has popped in his email, and if Morag or Jorge want to share theirs, then by all means, like, the beauty of NENA is that we connect people, and those connections carry on after today, hopefully, as well. But thank you.
That's fine. My question was just for Nick, so I've got
perfect. You can email him. Fabulous. Really, the biggest, sincerest, warmest thank you to our three wonderful speakers. Such great presentations, and the work that you're all doing is so critical, and we thank you for that. And for these wonderful participants for showing up on Sunday, being part of the discussion, and yeah, just being here with us. Have a really lovely day. If you're able to join us later on today, we'd love to see you there, and have a good Sunday.
Thanks, Megan, too. Bye.
Thanks, Nora.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Great to see you all.
everyone.